It had been another grueling day at the office, and Mr. Johnson sighed deeply as he stepped into his silent home. Once lively with the warmth of his beloved wife, Regina, it now felt empty. The familiar scent of her perfume had long faded, replaced by the sterile smell of dust that settled in unused rooms. It had been 3 years since Regina passed away. 3 years since the illness that lingered stubbornly had finally claimed her. Their 3 daughters, Sandra, Ruth, and little Rita, were left motherless, and Mr. Johnson was left a widower with a heavy heart. He had been too busy, always away, running the family company. Regina had been the nurturing figure, the one who took care of their children, balanced the chaos, and filled the house with laughter. Now, everything seemed out of balance, and Mr. Johnson's absence at home was a gaping wound that no bandage could cover. After years of mourning, Mr. Johnson found himself yearning for a change. He could not continue leaving his daughters with the maids while he was away. They needed a mother figure, and he needed a companion. As fate would have it, on one of his business trips, he met Danielle, a woman with a warm smile and a calming presence. Their conversation flowed easily, and for the first time in a long while, Mr. Johnson felt something inside him stir, hope. As the months went by, they grew close, sharing more laughter and moments that began to heal the scars on his heart. When Mr. Johnson finally spoke to Danielle about Regina and his daughters, her compassion ran deep. She promised to love the children as her own, a commitment that endeared her even more to him. When he introduced Danielle to his daughters, they embraced her with open hearts, eager for the warmth she would bring into their lives. Soon after, Mr. Johnson and Danielle got married, and the house once again echoed with laughter and hope. Months later, Danielle gave birth to a baby girl. But the joy of new life was overshadowed by tragedy. Complications during childbirth took Danielle's life, and Mr. Johnson was left shattered, losing a second wife, leaving him a single father to his 4 daughters. Grief clawed at his heart, a wound reopened, deeper and more painful than before. With no intention of remarrying, he leaned heavily on the maids who had been like family since Regina's time. Years passed, and the girls grew up. Sandra, now 17, was the protective eldest who had passion for photography. Ruth, 15, had a flair for fashion. Rita, 13, was passionate about music, and Gabrielle, Danielle's daughter, was a bright 10-year-old who exhibited qualities far beyond her years. While Sandra, Ruth, and Rita pursued their individual passions, Gabrielle's curiosity led her to the family company, showing a keen interest in learning the ropes of the business. Noticing her natural aptitude, Mr. Johnson began to teach Gabrielle the fundamentals of the company. Each time he came home, he would introduce her to different aspects of the business, encouraging her passion. Little did he know, his actions were sowing seeds of resentment in his older daughters. To Sandra, Ruth, and Rita, it seemed like Gabrielle was being groomed to inherit everything, a company that should rightfully belong to all of them. Late one night, as Mr. Johnson was away on another business trip, the 3 sisters gathered in Sandra's room. "It's always Gabrielle this, Gabrielle that," Sandra hissed, her voice laced with bitterness. "Father is practically handing the company to her on a silver platter." Ruth crossed her arms. "She's just 10, and he treats her like she's the only one who matters. What about us? We've been here all along, but we don't even get a say in the family business." Rita's voice trembled. "It's not fair. We are his daughters too. Why does Gabrielle get to take over?" Their jealousy deepened over the years, festering until it reached a boiling point. When the girls graduated from university, they happily hatched a dangerous plan to eliminate Gabrielle. Blinded by envy, they believed that removing her from the picture was the only way to secure their future. One fateful day, as Gabrielle was returning from the company, she was intercepted by 2 men. Hired by Sandra, Ruth, and Rita, the men swiftly dragged Gabrielle into a van, tying her hands as they drove off. The sister's instructions were clear: take her to a remote, deserted place where no one would find her. The van roared through unfamiliar, winding roads, eventually entering a dense forest. The canopy of trees closed in around them, the darkness almost suffocating. Suddenly, the van shuddered to a stop. Smoke billowed from the engine as the men cast, stepping out to inspect the damage. This was the moment Gabrielle had been waiting for. As the men argued over the broken engine, she slipped her hands free of the loosely tied rope, bolted from the van, and sprinted into the forest. Panic fueled her adrenaline, but with each step, her surroundings grew more unfamiliar and menacing. As night fell, the forest transformed into a hostile wilderness. The distant howls of wolves sent chills down her spine. Her feet stumbled over twisted roots, and branches clawed at her arms. She fought against exhaustion and fear, using every ounce of willpower to keep moving. Days turned into weeks, and the forest tested her resolve. Gabrielle scavenged for berries and roots, learned to catch fish from the streams, and built makeshift shelters with bamboo sticks to shield herself from the elements. She had to fend off snakes and hide from prowling wildcats. Her clothes were tattered, and her skin was bruised, but the fire in her heart never wavered. She was determined to survive. Months passed, and just as hope began to wane, a miracle appeared in the form of wildlife photographers. Their camera lenses had captured her gaunt figure as she emerged cautiously from the underbrush. The men were startled to find a young girl in the forest and immediately offered help. She was rescued at last. Meanwhile, back at home, Mr. Johnson was drowning in grief. For 10 long months, he had searched for Gabrielle without success. When the police eventually declared her missing and presumed dead, he was devastated. He had lost all hope and had almost resigned himself to a life of sorrow. But his daughters, Sandra, Ruth, and Rita, were the marks of innocent concern, hiding the terrible truth of what they had done. The day Gabrielle returned was nothing short of a miracle. Mr. Johnson's heart soared as he embraced his daughter, tears streaming down his face. But for Sandra, Ruth, and Rita, the sight of Gabrielle was like seeing a ghost. Their pale faces betrayed their guilt, and it wasn't long before whispers of the truth began to surface. One of the maids, who had always suspected the sisters' intentions, overheard them talking about the kidnapping. She rushed to Mr. Johnson and told him everything. Furious and heartbroken, he confronted his daughters, the rage in his eyes searing through them. "How could you?" he yelled, his voice trembling. "How could you do this to your own sister?" Sandra, the eldest, stepped forward, tears spilling down her cheeks. "Dad, this is all your fault. How could you think of willing the company to only Gabrielle?" Mr. Johnson's voice was cold and steady. "That's not true, Sandra. Gabrielle was never intended to inherit the company. She was only helping out because she wanted to learn and manage the company for all of you while she pursued her own dreams. She promised to oversee the family business until you were ready to take over, and you repay her kindness by trying to end her life." Ruth and Rita fell to their knees, guilt tearing at their hearts. "We are so sorry, Gabrielle. We were blinded by jealousy," Ruth sobbed. "We never meant to hurt you like this." Gabrielle, her heart softened by the sight of her remorseful sisters, forgave them despite the pain they had caused. But Mr. Johnson was not so forgiving. He could not look at his daughters the same way again. In a final act of retribution, he willed the company to Gabrielle, intending to give her control over the entire family's wealth. However, Gabrielle had a heart as big as her mother's. "Father, I don't want to punish my sisters," she said softly. "Please, let's share everything equally. All I want is a chance to build my own future while helping this family stay together." Moved by her generosity, Mr. Johnson reluctantly agreed. He could not deny that Gabrielle, despite all she had endured, remained the glue that held the family together. Envy and greed can destroy the strongest bonds, but love and forgiveness have the power to heal even the deepest wounds. True success is not defined by what you inherit, but by the character and kindness you display in times of adversity.